Welcome back to Minecraft Gadgets. On today's episode, I'm showing you an infinitely automatic brown mushroom block farm, which fuels itself by composting the brown mushroom blocks you get into bone meal, and can provide you with bone meal, mushroom blocks, or brown mushrooms at an incredible rate. As you can see, this farm has a lot of moving parts, so I'm going to walk you through what everything does today, how you have to design these sorts of mushroom farms, and show you some of the cool parts that make this farm work. Let's watch the process of the mushroom being grown and harvested from beginning to end. So first I put down the mushroom, it's bone mealed, and 2 blocks are removed by the stem before the first flying machine comes through and pushes all of the cap blocks down by 2. Now, the flying machine returns and the stem 2 more blocks are pushed out. Then we grab the 2 remaining stem blocks and push them over, and all of those are pushed into the chamber you saw me breaking the blocks in before. Now the second flying machine comes across and pushes the cap of the mushroom over, and it's fed into piston feed tapes that go right back into the breaking chamber. Now that flying machine is going to be triggered and it returns back to where it started, and we have a clear space for another mushroom to be grown. And we would have harvested about 45 mushroom blocks in that complete cycle, and it takes about 40 seconds, or 45 seconds. But before we walk through the steps of harvesting a mushroom in the farm, we should talk about how huge mushrooms grow. After you apply bone meal to a small brown mushroom, a large one can grow in one of 3 heights, 5, 6, or 7 blocks tall. Now importantly for our farm, we want to push all the cap blocks of the mushroom, these top brown blocks, off at one level, where we have the piston set up to push them around for the player to break them. At the lowest level, this isn't a problem, but when mushrooms grow at the 6 or 7 block high form, it means that we're starting to put the cap blocks above where our pistons are set up to push them across, which is the main reason for the first flying machine you saw that pushes them down 2 blocks. And of course, in order to push down the cap mushrooms 2 blocks, we need to make sure we take out 2 blocks of the stem at the bottom so that the higher mushrooms can still be pushed down without having any sort of collision here. The other important thing about designing the farm is that brown mushrooms take a 3 block radius on all sides free all the way up to the 9 or 8 block high growth limit. And although the top cap block grows at 7 blocks high, you can see that we actually need 1 more block of clearance space above some sort of obstructing block for the mushroom to grow perfectly. And when you have a system like this, according to the wiki, it should only take 1 bone meal for the mushroom to grow every time. But you can see this is a lot of space, and if all this was empty, it would be really difficult to have any sort of farm built around it, especially because we need pistons and blocks very close to get the player to place the mushroom automatically. In the farm, meanwhile, you can see that this space is clear after 3 blocks above where we plant the mushroom. We have the 7 by 7 area the mushroom requires all the way up to this block here, which is the upper limit of the height, totally and completely clear of any blocks and just clear of the flying machines. And what that means is that on average it takes something like 3 bone meal for a mushroom to grow in this farm, which is less than the perfect 1 bone meal that would be required in that circumstance, but is still enough that this machine can give us a net gain of bone meal after we compost all the mushroom blocks that we harvest. And this is the main reason why you see things like the piston that pops up here to grab the block from above, is so that we don't have to have another layer of blocks above this, which would reduce the rates astronomically. So let's break down what happens from beginning to end. The first thing that you see me do in the clip is turn on this observer clock here, which triggers this dispenser full of bone meal to start bone mealing whatever mushrooms I put on this podzol block. The next thing that you would do when you're usually using the farm and you want to position yourself to break all the blocks correctly is extend this piston here and walk into the corner with the fence and the dispenser on either side. We would then need a diamond axe, which could have silk touch if you're looking for the mushroom blocks, and a mushroom, brown mushroom only, and we would put our mushroom or stack of mushrooms in our right hand, and we hold down right and left click together, which means that when this fence post is pushed out, we're going to right click and place a mushroom block on the podzol here, which will trigger the farm to harvest the mushroom. Then, when this is not here, we're going to align our cursor on that bottom leftmost corner of the redstone lamp, which ensures that we break all 6 of these mushroom blocks on the side when they're pushed over. And you can see I've marked out with gold blocks the sort of imprint on the wall of where we're going to be able to break mushroom blocks. And the stem blocks that are pushed over come in from the front, from those 2 mushroom blocks you can see there, and we're going to break them too. It's a bit loud, so let's turn that off. Once we plant the mushroom, and I'll show you in a second what this looks like, you see that this comparator is going to read the solid mushroom stem block and see that the bone meal in this dispenser is going to cause it to give off a reading. Now the redstone from that is going to come out the other side, and it's also going to come out this way, and this triggers 2 things. First, it triggers these pistons to push the mushroom stem blocks over. And you're going to see that the entire mushroom stem is fed through these 2 blocks here. These 2 blocks, if you look, they come over and they head into this mess of pistons right here. But all that these pistons are doing is pushing the stem blocks over, down, and then over again so that they go into the breaking chamber where the player can break them. So the first thing that happens is the 2 mushroom stem blocks that will always be here regardless of the height of the mushroom are pushed over by those 2 pistons because of this comparator here. The next thing that happens is this redstone line runs over and triggers this flying machine. And this flying machine looks complicated, but all that we're doing ultimately here is just pushing 2 rows of pistons 7 blocks wide across the mushroom cap area. And the first row of pistons will push down mushrooms that grow at the top height, which is right here, and so they would push down these mushroom blocks by 1, and then the second row of pistons would push them down again so that they end up on this level, which, as we talked about, is the level that we're pushing over with the pistons. Now, once that machine has flown across, it triggers this line over here, which causes it to return. The other thing that does is it triggers this TNT duper, but we're going to talk about what that does in a second. Then the machine returns, and this is where you see the fancy piston action here in the stem area. Now what those fancy pistons are doing is they're getting rid of the last blocks of the mushroom stem. There could be up to 4 blocks at this point with a maximum height mushroom, and those 4 blocks would be positioned like this, although they'd be in this column. If I put this here, it will trigger the machine, so I'm going to place it over here. The first thing that's going to happen is these 2 pistons push the middle blocks out, and that leaves us with this sort of unusual configuration of blocks right here. This sticky piston then comes over and grabs the block, which would be right here. It grabs it and pulls it down, and then we push up the pod sole we grow the mushrooms on, so that this block, which would be right here, then goes up here. And then those 2 pistons trigger again, the blocks get pushed around and into the breaking chamber, and we've pushed the entire 6-block mushroom stem in front of the player, and they've broken it, and now all we have left is the cat mushroom blocks, which, as we talked about, would be always at this layer. So at this point, we send out another redstone signal, which goes over, around, and up to this flying machine. And this device right here is from a video I'll link in the description, which is a slow 2-way flying machine. And this makes sure that even though we're pushing 45 blocks in the mushroom cap through here in just a few seconds, the player has time to break all of them. Because while the player is instant mining, we don't want it to be that a lag spike or a little bit of a misclick could just destroy the entire machine. So the slowness here, it lowers the rates of the farms, but I tested it and it works out better this way because it makes sure that we're always breaking all the blocks that come through. Now this flying machine comes across and it pushes all 45 blocks of the cap into these feed tapes over here. Now as you can see, there's 7 pistons because there's 7 rows of mushroom blocks in the cap. What's going to happen is that 3 of these rows are pushed through a set of 3 pistons, which are right here, as you can see, and 3 of these, and the second set of 3 rows is going through these 3 piston columns right here. They're getting pushed around into this sort of weird zigzag pattern that we're able to break of these 6 blocks, and each block you see here corresponds to one of these 6 rows in the mushroom cap. And that part is fairly simple. We just have the machine push over and then go back. The last row, which will always consist of 5 blocks, the way these mushrooms grow, gets pushed over at this level, gets pushed over here and then over in a 2-block wide bridge out into the TNT blast chamber. And when the top flying machine returns on the next giant mushroom, the TNT drops down and explodes them. And the reason we have these automatically destroyed and not destroyed by the player is that we want to make sure we always have mushrooms dropping to be dispensed back, and we'll ultimately drop about 1.6 mushrooms for every one we use in the farm. I'll explain the math of this at the very end of the video. And this makes sure that even if we're using Silk Touch on the mushroom blocks, the farm can run infinitely and doesn't have to burn through a supply of mushrooms that you gather beforehand. Now, this circuit right here, which I can trigger by activating this observer, is a bit complicated, but it basically makes sure that we're able to send the flying machine back without getting in its way. And it does this with a double piston extender that pushes the white block over here, and I'll put up a clip right now where you can see it working when the flying machine pushes across the mushroom. You see it triggers, and then the flying machine returns, and it triggers again when this block is broken, but this happens just as the flying machine is out of the way, so the double piston doesn't push into anything or cause any problems. The final step of the farm, when this flying machine flies back, is that we send a redstone pulse along this line, under the blocks, over through here, and it's very simple. It just comes up and pushes this fence gate out, which then causes the right and left clicking player to right click on the fence gate, which, as you can see, if I'm standing here and aligned at that corner, my right click is actually going to be able to place a mushroom on the right side of this fence, and then that will once again trigger the start of the farm and the whole cycle will repeat. And that takes about 45 seconds, like I said. Now you might be wondering how this farm is fully automatic. Well, to make a brown mushroom, we need one brown mushroom and one bone meal in perfect conditions. In this farm, it seems to take about an average of 3 bone meal to grow a brown mushroom. One brown mushroom produces 49, 50, or 51 brown mushroom blocks. And brown mushroom blocks can turn into 1/3 of a brown mushroom, meaning if you break 3 brown mushroom blocks, on average you get 1 mushroom back. Or 1 brown mushroom block is 1/9 of a bone meal if you compost it. Now if you're paying attention, you'll see that that means that 1 brown mushroom, giant brown mushroom, can produce more than enough brown mushrooms or bone meal to grow itself back. So 1 brown mushroom turns into 1.6 brown mushrooms in this farm because we take 5 brown mushroom blocks and blow them up with TNT, which we use to replant the mushroom. But we have a choice about the rest of the blocks. We can break them with Silk Touch, or we can compost them and get bone meal, and we'll get 5.5 bone meal, or 45 blocks if we use the Silk Touch. And we can actually just break them without Silk Touch and not compost them and get 15 brown mushrooms. So what are the rates of this farm overall? Well, we harvest 1 huge brown mushroom about every 45 seconds is the time it takes for the farm to complete 1 cycle and chop up 1 mushroom. That means that each hour we chop up about 80 brown mushrooms. And that turns into an hourly rate of 440 bone meal if you're composting the mushroom blocks, 3,600 brown mushroom blocks if you're just using Silk Touch, or 1,200 brown mushrooms if you're breaking them without Silk Touch. So overall, this farm can be a somewhat effective source of bone meal, building blocks, scaffolding blocks, farm fuel in furnaces if you're playing Bedrock Edition, where brown mushroom blocks might smelt 1.5 items each, or 1,200 brown mushrooms, which is probably the most useful output of the farm, because that is far more mushrooms than you could ever use in mushroom stew. So that's it. That's the mushroom block factory. It is quite a project, but it's also quite satisfying to watch, quite satisfying to be done, and it is certainly the most complicated thing I've shown you guys yet on this series, but I just couldn't hold this back. It was so cool. I worked to finish it this week, and I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, let me know what you thought or what you'd like to see me farm next in the comments down below, and I will see you all in the next episode.